Hey, it's Allison here. Thank you so much for tuning in to today's episode where I am interviewing Casey Schmidt, who is a local RN and lactation consultant here in Humboldt County. Casey shares her breadth of knowledge in all things lactation, and come to find out, lactation is so much more than latching. As someone who has never been pregnant, I was so excited to learn about what people who are breastfeeding, chest feeding, may find in their journey with a newborn. Whether this will be your first time or you have multiple experiences, there is always something new to learn. And if you are new here, welcome. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you like our show, hit the subscribe button wherever you are listening. This helps more people find us and spreads the word about pelvic health. It is our mission here at the V Movement to have all VOVA owners be better informed about their pelvic health. And one last thing, Sarah and I are going to be launching a new 8-week series where we dive into menopause with a focus on fitness and wellness. Click the link in our show notes to get on the waitlist to be the first to learn more. Welcome to the V Movement, the podcast that's all about pelvic health and getting the V's in your life moving. We are your hosts, Allison Craig, physical therapist specializing in pelvic health,
and Sarah Landis, physical therapist and board-certified women's health specialist. In each episode, we delve into the world of pelvic health, exploring everything from the vulva and vagina to the vagus nerve.
Whether you're looking to enhance your understanding of pelvic health, seeking advice on common concerns, or simply want to join a community that embraces these important discussions, the V Movement is the place to be.
So tune in and let's embark on this journey together towards better pelvic health. Because when it comes to the V's in our lives, movement is key.
Today, we have a very special guest. We have Casey Schmidt, who is a registered nurse and a board-certified lactation consultant here in Humboldt County. We do not have very many here in this area, so I'm just super excited to be able to talk with you and share what it is that a lactation consultant does. I am somebody who has never had kids, so I've heard of what a lactation consultant is just through my patients, but there's plenty of new moms, new people, dads, parents, however you identify people who don't know what you do, which is really important. I'm going to let Casey take it away. We'd just love to hear a little bit about your background and, just give us an idea of what is it like in a day of life of Casey.
What is a lactation consultant?
Yeah.
So, I have very deep roots in Humboldt County. I have been here on and off since I was 9 years old. I have been here for 25 years. I'm kind of dating myself, but it's been a long time. So I'm a registered nurse and I'm a board certified lactation consultant. And you wanted to hear, we were talking a few minutes ago, like, what is a lactation consultant? And most people think that my job is like, oh, I help latch babies. And, what a great job. And I have to say that this is the most amazing profession in the whole wide world. Honestly, this is my sole vocation. And a lactation consultant is a lot of different roles kind of rolled up into one. So I feel like I'm a nurse. I feel like I'm a dietitian. I feel like I'm a pediatrician, a dermatologist, a psychologist, and honestly, a friend. I feel like a lot of my families that I'm working with, they sort of turn into my friends. When you have a new baby, it's a very vulnerable time, and the work that I do is very intimate. And also, it's a time of great transition for people. When you become a parent, it's a time of great transition. You're in a role transition, right? Like we think of kind of archetype, like you're a maiden and then you become a mother or a parent. So as welcome and joyful as it is, it's also a transformation. And I think it's pretty challenging. And when I'm working with families, it's typically because they are having some challenges. And it's a joyful time and it can be a stressful time. And yeah, there's a lot of tears and also a lot of laughter during my consults.
Yeah. You mentioned so much. It's not just latching babies. It's the relationship that you have with the parents and the support system, and you're there helping guide, like psychology, like you said, there's so much that you're there for them during these really hard, stressful times if they're having a challenge, which I'm sure is probably a majority of the people who seek your care.
Yes.
Yeah. So what does it look like? Do people get a referral to a lactation consultant, or is it part of like the prenatal team, or how does one become your patient or client?
I'd say there's a few different avenues. It is not routinely part of prenatal care,
Mm,
and that's really a disservice to the families that I work with. Um, and I don't think that's through anyone's negligence that it's not. It's just it's kind of an afterthought. Working as an IBCLC, it is considered an allied health profession, but it has not been a profession for that long. I think around 1980, I should know this. Like right around 1984.
mm,
So it's a relatively newer profession, and there's so much emphasis on the birth plan and the prenatal care and the pregnancy. And then all of a sudden, the baby's born. And when the parent and the baby are stable, it is all about breastfeeding. So those first couple of hours, those first couple of days, and sometimes those first few years. So
mhm.
you were asking, how does someone become my patient?
Yeah.
And there's a few of us in the community, and some of us work in hospitals, some of us work in clinics, and some of us do have a private practice where we do home visits. I kind of do
Mm,
a little bit of all of that. So I do work in the hospital, and I'll often meet people like when they're in labor, or often kind of during that first golden hour. And we should come back to the golden hour, but so I'll
yeah, I
meet
was gonna
people that first hour or two after they have their baby, and then I'll see them for a couple days. And then we're fortunate enough to have a program where people can come back in for an outpatient lactation visit. And sometimes that can be for a newborn weight check. Sometimes it can be for nipple wounds, nipple damage, painful nipples, painful breasts, engorgement, which is where the milk production is kind of kicked into gear.
mm.
And so that's one way um, that patients can access lactation care.
It is interesting that that isn't always part of, like, the prenatal part. Just like with pelvic health consults, I feel like if people can get into us prior to postpartum, just to have that awareness and knowledge, even if it's just 1 or 2 visits, is really helpful, especially for somebody who's never had a kid, and then all of a sudden they have a kid and, like, right away, they're trying to figure out how to breastfeed, and it's like, it should be a an I think at least me who've never had a kid, I would be like, "Oh, I guess, it just is natural. The kid figures it out." But that's not always the case. If you do see somebody in the prenatal part,
Mhm.
how often is that happening, and what does that look like?
That's such a good question. I probably only do a prenatal visit 1 to 2% of the families that I work with.
Oh,
So
wow.
it's pretty low. And I would say that those prenatal visits, it's usually a second time parent, and they have had struggles with the first.
Mm,
And so they kind of know, to hopefully have a more positive experience, or just kind of, have a plan in place. Then they will request a prenatal lactation, or their provider might request it. And that might look like someone that has a history of low milk production. That's a pretty common example of a family that I might be working with. There's about 15% of parents that actually don't make enough milk. They can make milk, it just may not be a robust supply. And so they would need to look at some supplementation options. And when we are supplementing, our first choice is the parent's own milk. Second choice is donor milk. That can be formal, like pasteurized from the milk bank, or that can be informal through community milk sharing.
wow, yeah.
Yeah.
It's all things
And
I did not know were a thing, and I mean, I knew, like, is there still a formula shortage? And I know there was a lot of women who would, like, help donate their breast milk. Is that still a thing?
yeah, so if a baby needs supplementation, our first choice is parents' own milk, then donor
Mm,
milk, and then formula.
okay.
There is not currently a formula shortage, but when we did have that shortage, it was because the plant that was making it, there was, I can't think of the name, but, there was like some, contamination.
Mm,
So there was the formula was contaminated. And so if someone is using formula, we teach safe formula prep. And that is also part of what I do. And I'm
wow.
not anti formula, I'm not pro formula. It's all about providing information and really helping to create a plan that that family needs. And working as a lactation consultant, we have a format that we follow. Number one is we always want to make sure the baby's being fed, and
Mm,
that can look a lot of different ways. And number two, we want to protect the parents' milk production, what we call launching milk production. And then number three is we want to get that parent the support or that family the support that they need to have a successful feeding journey, however that looks. So that's kind of my professional guidelines.
yeah, I love that word that you used. It's getting parents and the babies on their feeding journey, whatever that looks like, whatever
Yeah.
it needs to be, and they're, like, not having, any shame or guilt around that too. Because as a physical therapist, when I have patients with their babies, that does come into our practice even though I'm not working with them specifically about the breastfeeding, but of course, it's part of their health journey, and noticing how much sadness there can be when a mom can't latch or doesn't have a good breastfeeding experience. That's really big. So
Yeah. And, we call that breastfeeding grief and trauma. And
mm,
that is an area that I don't think people even know that there's language for what they have experienced when they can't breastfeed their baby, if that was their intention. And if it's a first baby, you don't know that you can't make enough milk. And so there is a lot of trauma. And then if they have a second baby, there's a lot of post traumatic stress. A lot of emotions come up for families. And so that is often a client that I will start prenatally with when it's their second and they've
mm,
had that experience. And then we can put a plan in place to really maximize their milk production and help them create a breastfeeding journey that can be enjoyable, right? And then one of the other things about breastfeeding, and there's a lot of names for breastfeeding, right? Just like there's a lot of different names for parents. Some people identify as mothers, but not everybody. So we can call it breastfeeding, we can call it chest feeding, we can
oh, right.
call it body feeding, and I might just call it breastfeeding just for like ease of conversation. I will, typically take my cues from the parent that I'm working with right in front of me. And sometimes I'll just say breastfeeding, just like in a conversation with this, knowing that there's a lot of different language, and I do like to be inclusive of everybody. And when I'm rounding in the hospital, I sometimes I'll work with a family that is not breastfeeding, and they'll feel like, oh, I don't need to see a lactation consultant. I'm not breastfeeding. And I just love, helping them. I'm like, "Oh, there's so much we can talk about. How do you take care of your breasts when you need to suppress lactation? How do you take care of your breasts? How do you safely prepare formula? What's the newborn tummy size? What kind of diaper output are you looking for?" So, there's a lot of support and education that I can provide for my families, even if they're not breastfeeding, even if they're
Mm,
not chest feeding. So, it really also working as a lactation consultant, you're considered an infant feeding specialist. So, it is really a lot more than just latching babies.
yeah, that's big. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's all encompassing. You have so much knowledge and so much that you can, provide beyond that. So that's really great to know.
And another thing I find is, well, if we talk a little bit about a gap in gender care, which we might
Mm,
just jump right into. If it's like a Friday afternoon and you call your doctor and you're like, well, my breast hurts and it's red, they might not even want to see you. They might just give you a prescription for antibiotics. And there is so much care that a lactation consultant can provide, or a lactation consultant working with the patient, working with the provider, right? Because it's all about creating that circle of care and everybody being on the same page. And so a lot of people, they just kind of panic when it's like the breast, like they don't really know how to treat it or where to go or who to refer to.
Hmm.
So that's also something that comes up. I get a fair amount of texts 10 o'clock on a Friday night, and I'm kind of able to give people some guidelines like this is what you can try. And if it gets worse, if you are experiencing this or it's not better in 24 hours, please contact your provider. So, really just giving some guidelines and staying within my lane, right? I'm not a provider. I don't prescribe, I don't diagnose. So, you know, and I have my families refer back to their provider in most circumstances. But a lot of times, the care that families need for lactation is time sensitive.
Right.
And that can be that first golden hour. When you launch milk production in that first 1 to 2 hours, you launch your milk trajectory higher than if you initiate like milk removal, right? So that's either a baby suckling at the breast or the chest or using your hands, hand expression. We don't typically use a breast pump in the first 24 hours. But when you initiate milk removal in the first 1 to 2 hours, you actually launch your milk production trajectory higher than if you even initiate it in the first 3 to 4 hours.
Oh,
That's a
wow.
yeah.
So that's
So
called the golden hour. So right after the baby's born, the first
Mhm.
1 to 2 hours is the golden hour.
The golden hour. Yeah, it's kind
Wow.
of after the first breastfeed.
Is that something that is done in the hospital? Like that's really promoted or
This is
how?
such a good question.
Yeah.
I love that question. Um, I could talk about the golden hour forever. So actually that is promoted in the hospital, and that's like evidence-based. It is the current standard of care. When a baby is born, as long as they are stable, we have the APGAR scoring, as long as they're stable, they remain on the parent's chest, and that is the safest place for them to transition from the womb environment to the outside world.
Yeah. So if baby is stable, everything's looking good. They get it right onto the
Yep,
parent's chest and
they go right onto the parent. Of course, they're dried off, and as long as, as long as they're breathing, their heart rate's good, yeah, they stay with the parent till after the first feeding, and that's usually about the first 2 hours. We don't weigh them, we don't give them medications.
so
Yeah.
you as a lactation consultant, you are typically depending on what time of day you're there, you're
Yeah.
in the room with them, helping them with that first.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Oh
I
my
know, isn't
goodness.
that amazing?
Yeah. Wow. That is a really just such a special thing to witness and to be part of and to help with. That is a really
Yeah. It it really is. And that is where you can kind of help facilitate families like starting to tune into and trust their own instincts, right? Because ultimately they are going to know their baby better than anyone else. And I feel like when I can start working with a family kind of in that golden hour, not a lot of hands on, but sort of letting them know what's happening. Their baby is transitioning. And when they are with the parent, that helps. It helps their breathing, it helps their temperature, it helps their heart rate, it decreases the baby's stress response, and that's very helpful for keeping their blood sugar stable. And that skin to skin, that's good for the milk making hormones. You produce oxytocin, which is the love hormone. So then we've got the new family, particularly mom and baby, in this little love bubble.
wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, little love bubble. I love that.
Yeah. Yeah. So, babies are born with these innate reflexes. And so a lot of what I do is using anatomy and physiology to work for that parent and baby. And it's all about positioning. So now I'm going to move into the breastfeeding.
Yeah, perfect.
So, breastfeeding is a whole body activity, right? It's not just like a baby's mouth and a parent's breast or nipple. It's really a whole body activity. And because you're a physical therapist, this will really resonate with you. But really, when the parent is supported and the baby is on the parent, the mom's stable, she's comfortable, right? She's relaxed. the baby is stabilized against the parent, and then they can use all their reflexes for breastfeeding. They don't have to worry about stabilizing themselves.
Mm.
And that honestly requires very little intervention. It's more about getting everybody positioned right. And then you let the baby get things going in the right direction, but then you can really let the baby self attach and imprint on the breast.
Wow.
Yeah.
So, and in most times that is pretty like what happens if the baby doesn't latch or like what kind of things do you have to do to facilitate if the reflexes or the stability part doesn't
It's
work as well?
positioning.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's
positioning.
all
Okay.
about body positioning. Sometimes babies don't latch, right? There's various reasons. Um, Babies can have really tight muscles. They can have compressed nerves, whether it's the
Mm.
fetal lie, the way they were positioned in the womb, whether it's, the birth process. Like those parents and babies are working hard, right?
Yes.
We don't call
Yeah.
it labor for nothing. And so sometimes babies do not latch. And the beauty of working with a lactation consultant is we can help you launch your milk production and protect that milk supply. And that typically is by teaching the parent hand expression. And so we hand express drops of colostrum, and then we show you how to feed that to your baby. And it's not with a bottle; it's usually a spoon or a finger.
Oh,
And
wow.
sometimes it's
Okay.
syringe. And a newborn tummy size for the first 24 hours is about the size of, like, a little grape. It's very, very small.
Oh,
So,
whoa.
a full feeding for a newborn is really just a couple of milliliters. Yeah, yeah, so
Okay.
less than a teaspoon.
That's yeah, that's good to put in perspective of like what they need in that first golden hour or how
That's
long
the first 24 hours.
first 24 hours. Okay.
Mhm. Yeah.
Wow. So they really don't need a lot,
No.
just
Yeah.
little bits at a time?
Yep, little
Or
bits
yep.
at a
Okay.
time. Mhm. Yeah. And then after the first feeding or the golden hour and you've helped that parent hand express, fed the baby, then the partner gets to do skin to skin with the newborn.
Mm,
Yeah. And for dads, uh, within about 30 minutes of skin to skin with the baby, it changes your brain. You actually create new neural pathways in your brain. So there's a lot of hormonal changes happening for parents, and there's a lot of physiological changes happening for babies.
mhm. Yeah, so whoever the partner is, not just a dad or however somebody would identify, but yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Feeling
So
that contact, just how
yeah,
it changes the neural pathways. That's amazing how our brains work and how we can just have love at first sight, essentially, right?
it is a whole like chemical, biological, neurological response. It's
Mm,
pretty amazing. And for moms, it takes about 16 hours. But for partners, males specifically, it takes 30 minutes.
really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
That is so interesting.
And some of that research was pioneered by a South African pediatrician, and his name is Niles Bergman. He's sort of one of my heroes, but he really has presented a lot of literature and research on the benefits of skin to skin.
Hmm,
Yeah,
wow.
yeah.
So 16 hours for the mom or the person assigned female at birth who gave the baby,
Hmm.
and then 30 minutes for assigned male at birth?
Yeah,
Wow,
yeah.
that's wild.
It is wild. And I hope this is giving you like an inside view that working as a lactation consultant is a lot more than latching babies.
Mhm.
I feel like I have a very holistic approach. So, first, this is a very intimate and vulnerable time for families. So, really creating an environment of safety. And then, how does that parent want to feed their baby, right? And how can I help them get from point A to point B? Like, this is how they want it to be. This is where we're at. And how can we create a plan to help them get to where they want to be,
Mhm.
especially when there's challenges?
I learned already so much about being a lactation consultant and what it looks like. Is
Actually pretty amazing. Like, that's the journey that families are on. There's just, like, all these things, and then like, it's all about feeding, and also, newborns, they feed 8 to 12 times a day. So, this is all happening pretty much all the time.
Mhm.
And when you have something like a nipple wound and your baby's nursing 12 times a day, you can imagine that it can be a real barrier to successful breastfeeding. So I work a lot with helping people. How do you take care of your breasts? How do you take care of your nipples? That's a big part of what I do also.
Yeah. How does somebody take care of their nipples?
So if you have a damaged nipple, you have an abrasion, you have a wound or a lot of tenderness, first we have to figure out what caused the wound in the first place, right? Was it
Mhm.
positioning? Was it latch? Does baby have something with their oral anatomy that might be contributing? So first we have to figure out what caused the problem. And then we have to take the steps to heal. And for nipples, we specifically use the principles of moist wound healing. So that might be if, depending on the severity of their wound, they might just need some organic nipple balm. If it's an abrasion or really painful, they might need the organic nipple balm followed by a gel pad, right? And that helps speed up healing.
Mhm.
And then depending on the severity, there's some other treatments. But the good thing is nipples can heal quite fast once you correct the underlying problem. But I feel like this
Right.
is sounding like physical therapy.
Yeah, right? It's all physical therapy.
Yeah, I know. And it's
Really.
in my family, like, I can link everything back to breastfeeding, so yeah.
Oh, that's great. Yeah. Well, and with pelvic health, if somebody's breastfeeding, that really changes all the hormones too. And it changes how our pelvic floor functions or at least improves as far as strength goes. We do lose some strength when people are breastfeeding
Mhm.
because of the way that the estrogen levels change. And so that definitely affects the pelvic floor too. So I definitely talk about at least that aspect in my sessions with patients, just checking in like, oh, are you still breastfeeding? Okay, that could be part of why you might still be having some incontinence or vaginal dryness or, pain with intercourse. Those are some things that may just take a little bit more time because of breastfeeding that will eventually get better. But
Right.
yeah, so those
Because your
are
estrogen's lower, so,
mhm, yeah.
and on that topic, and I'm sure this is something that so those postpartum patients, if they are having, like, a lot of pelvic pain, vaginal dryness, it is safe to use, like, vaginal estrogen.
Yeah, it's safe for breastfeeding because it's just at the vaginal entrance. It's not systemic, so it's not going through the bloodstream. That's been an interesting thing to learn and expand upon. I mean, hormones are a big thing right now. People are still kind of wary about it, but the vaginal estrogen cream is key. And I'm glad to see that more providers are more on board with prescribing it too. Because I
I
have
think
noticed
postpartum, not a lot of providers are doing that.
I know, but there are some more. I have been providing more education, not to the providers themselves. I probably need to start just getting out there and being like, "Hey, if somebody's postpartum, it might be helpful for them to have some estrogen to help with, especially during breastfeeding." We need to get like a whole coalition together of like all this documentation to help provide it and to see pass it out to all the providers.
Yes, yes, wouldn't that
Be great. That would be great. But that's why we have these conversations because we all learn from each other and
It's so true, and I just love this, like, this intersection of, are you breastfeeding? And then looking at the pelvic floor health and the decrease in estrogen from the breastfeeding. I know because somebody was asking me, "Well, why are they interviewing you?" And I was like, "Well, I'm not really sure, but now I know."
it all relates.
And that's when I'm a lactation consultant, like, I kinda named my business Holistic Lactation, my private practice, and it is holistic, it's all-encompassing, like, you've got the parents, the baby, the feeding. You can't discount, like, getting sunlight, taking a walk, nourishing foods, family support, professional support. Um, yeah,
Yeah.
rest.
Having time to go to the bathroom and not rushing.
Yeah, there you
Don't
go.
want
So it is all tied
right?
in.
It is.
And along those lines, it actually takes more calories to make breast milk than when you're pregnant. You need at least 500 extra calories per day when you're breastfeeding. So, and I like to think of it, and this is kind of how I describe it for my families. Well, when the baby's in the womb, right, they're being nourished through the placenta. And then when they're born, that nourishment continues. It's just through the breasts. So it's still providing this continuous nourishment. And that takes a lot of energy in all ways.
Yes. It's just hard enough for myself to eat enough in a daily basis just because it's exhausting to cook and do those things. So, having a new parent and then having to add that, adding more food intake, you're tired, it's just there's a
Yeah.
lot to it. So, having that support system is huge. And just knowing that you need that much more food for milk
Yeah.
production.
I don't think people know that. And then they're
Yeah.
just starving. And it's so easy to feel pretty depleted. And so really that it like in my consults, I always start with the parent first, right? And I'm like, okay, like we've got to set you up. And that's really just a good analogy. Like the more we can take care of the parent, then the better that they are able to parent their new baby. And we really cannot forget the mother. There's so much
Mhm.
emphasis on the baby, right? But we
Right.
really, really have to hold the mother or that parent. It's so important. And I heard a great quote from an OBGYN, and it was like, when you go home and you have a new baby, there are no visitors, there's only staff. And it's basically
Uh,
you don't need help holding the baby. I mean, maybe if you want to shower, but really, you need people doing your laundry, dropping off meals, vacuuming, doing the dishes, bringing you a cup of tea, bringing you snacks because you're starving.
I love that. That's great. Our staff.
I
Yeah.
know, right? There's no visitors, only staff. And when I first say this to people, like, it takes them a minute and they're like, "Oh," and it's like, yeah, it's permission for you to rest, heal, get to know your baby, establish your milk production. That takes about 6 weeks. You're actually establishing milk for the first 6 weeks.
Mm. How long do people typically breastfeed for? And do you have a lactation consultant? Do you continue to see them for a while? Or I guess it probably depends, but
It does depend. Oftentimes, like, it's great if we can work with someone in that golden hour, but I find the first 3 to 6 days is the most important.
mm,
That is when things tend to fall apart in that first 3 to 6 days. And think about, your milk usually comes in or milk production kinda kicks into gear about day 3, maybe day 4. So, that is a really, really important time frame. And then 2 weeks is another time frame that's really important. And then sometimes I will start working with someone again, like maybe around 4 to 5 months or when people are going back to work, and then we kinda talk about that. So those are some of the sort of milestones where I tend to see people. And it really just depends. Sometimes people wanna just come in for like a little checkup or a weight check. Not only do we work with the parents, but we work with babies. So we do weight checks, we do a lot of suck evaluations, very thorough. We do a lot of baby massage, or we teach parents some facial massage and sucking exercises they can do. It's like therapeutic touch, right? How can we help the muscles in their face relax? As lactation consultants, we refer a lot of our families to craniosacral therapists, and there are a few lactation consultants that are certified in craniosacral as well.
mm. Oh,
Um,
wow.
yeah, so body work is really beneficial for babies.
I know I have heard of babies going to chiropractors, but I hadn't
Some
heard
babies Yeah, some babies go
craniosacral.
to
Yeah.
Yep, some babies go to chiropractors. but we refer a lot for craniosacral therapy.
Sacral.
Yeah, and
Okay.
sometimes that can be like the little missing piece.
Yeah. Well, there's so much that we touched on, and one direction we could go another time is like about the learning how to go back to work while you're breastfeeding. That's a whole other topic that I
Yeah,
think is really important. Um,
very important.
so maybe we'll have to do another one about that because that's huge. Because
That
yeah.
is huge, and I will just say I'm part of a community work group, and we kind of revitalized our group, and we created a new mission statement and a new name, and so we are now Breastfeed Humboldt.
Oh,
And you can Google it, you can look on Facebook, you can look on Instagram. And one of our projects that we're working on right now is collecting information from community members like, what was your experience going back to work? What went well? What were your challenges? And that is going to be a big focus for our group for 2025. We would like to do a donor milk drive, and we would also like to put out some educational materials about breastfeeding and going back to work, which kind of looks like pumping.
hey, that's great.
So, yeah.
Yeah, I'll definitely put that in the show notes for as resources for people to look up.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
Breastfeed Humboldt, and then we also have, a nice little grid of all the new parent support groups that are throughout the county, and there's currently one every day of the week except Tuesday. And most of those have an IBCLC. You can do infant weight checks, you can connect with other families, and we have found that peer-to-peer support, being in community with other new parents, it really it's just one of the most impactful things on someone's journey because you might have questions or concerns or feel like you're not doing something well, and then you realize the 3 people sitting next to you have the same thing. So it really takes you out of that like, "Oh, it's just me," right? Or maybe some of that shame or blame or like, "Why can't I do this?" When you realize, "Oh, okay, we all have different things that we're working on." And we also, people make lifelong friends in these groups.
mm,
Really, really one of the most important things.
yeah, that support system, knowing that you're not alone and other people are there to help support you and help you through that. Because yeah, we all have different experiences, but can experience something similar enough to where we can support each other and
Yeah.
exactly like you said, decrease that shame, decrease that guilt, decrease the it's just me and the fear around it.
Yeah. And the "it's just me," like, "Why can't I do this?" or "Why am I having problems?" That is the piece that, like, it really isn't just you.
Mhm.
Because most people have some struggles with breastfeeding, but we are just not set up in our culture. Like, people don't have 1 year paid maternal paternal leave. They don't have home visits where they can stay home for the first 30 or 40 days. And so we've lost a lot of that, right? And the biology of breastfeeding and even an infant's biology, it's ancient, and their only requirements are to be close to their provider and for nutrition. But we impose all these schedules and rules on families, and it's a disservice, right? They've lost touch with, oh, okay, my baby's biology is ancient. Like they're not trying to manipulate me. And I feel like we've lost touch with that. And so parents, it's harder for them to find their own confidence. And so if I could pass anything along is to really help families find their own confidence and trust themselves. And one of the ways that we do that is, they can get skilled support and really have a plan that supports where they're at and where they want to go.
Well, I will definitely put that in the show notes. As we're coming to an end here, want to just check in and see, is there anything else that you want to share? Are there any resources or places that people could reach out to you if they had any questions or want to work with you as a lactation consultant? If you're in the Humboldt County area, I'm guessing.
Yeah, I can share some resources. The Breastfeed Humboldt, that is a great resource. Like I said, you can access a support group any day of the week, but Tuesday right now. And then I have been working at the Trillium Birth Center at Mad River Community Hospital. Thursday was the last day we were opened. I did work that day. We're
Yeah.
closed now, and I am starting this week coming up at Providence St. Joe's. So I'll be working there inpatient and a little bit of outpatient. We're trying to create clinic space to have as many outpatients as we have, so they'll have access to care.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, so I'll be there, and then I have a website. It's CaseySchmidtLactation.com, and that's where you can find me.
Ah, oh,
Yeah,
that's great. Yeah.
and my information's also on Breastfeed Humboldt,
Okay. All
as
right.
well as, everyone in Humboldt County that provides lactation support. We're all listed there, so it's a really nice place to go.
Okay. Yeah, I'm looking it up right now, so I will definitely pass this along and to the patients that I see as well. I'll have to put a little resource page together and include this because it's really big. Well, I appreciate you so much.
Oh,
Thank you, Casey. We'll keep in touch and maybe do another episode sometime soon. The information shared in this podcast by Sarah, Allison, and our guest interviews are intended for educational, entertainment, and informational purposes only. It is not a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. While we are licensed physical therapists, we are not your personal physical therapists, and no patient-provider relationship is formed. If you have any health concerns or questions, please consult your medical provider. The information on this podcast or any of our other platforms is to use at your own risk.